WV Uncommon Place. This podcast is a variety podcast that houses numerous series to cover mental health, empowerment, podcast framework, and various intimate theories to get to know the hosts, along with occasional movies reviews and dives in pop culture with our event podcast episode. The Uncommon Place digs into bringing guests on that stories don't fit the mold and are very different. WV stands for the great state of West Virginia, and every quarter we cover something in West Virginia. Stacy and myself, JR, are your hosts, so please come along for this venture to Uncommon Place.
Greetings, everybody. My name is J.R. Sparrow, like the intro told you, and we have a special guest with us today. When people write about historical women, and yes, I said historical women, that kind of work encompass a lot of research, and sometimes it takes a lot of fortitude because you're telling a story that may not always get told in a proper manner. But this lady that we have with us today, her name is Barbara Mahika. Did I do that correctly without chopping it up? She's here with us today to tell us about one of her novels about Dolores Del Rio. And I'm glad to hear about that. And you've done work on Frida Kahlo.
Hello, yeah.
Hello. Yeah, hello. And I've seen a lot of artwork about her. And you also are and have were teaching at Georgetown University.
Right.
That's an amazing feat right there. Now let me do this. Let's go back to your childhood. What from your childhood that you, and this is a crazy question I'm about to ask, and this will either put a smile on your face or it'll put a frown. What is something from your childhood that you learned from a grandparent?
Oh, from a grandparent.
Yes.
I didn't grow up around grandparents, so
Okay.
I wasn't really exposed to my
All
grandparents.
right. Well, what about someone that wasn't your parent? An aunt, maybe uncle, something that they taught you that your parents didn't teach you.
I would say that I learned mostly from teachers and then later from professors. Um, I've been an academic for so many years, and as a child, I wasn't very big. I was the kid that nobody wanted on their sports team because it was the days when they lined you up by height. I don't think they do that anymore. Uh, and then the captain of the team chose her. It was always, I mean, sports were not integrated. Her team, and I was the one who never got chosen. So I I so I didn't excel in anything athletic, so I had to excel in academics. And I would say that the professor, I had a Spanish professor when I first started UCLA. I was a French major, and I was very, very serious about my French major. And I had a group of friends and we spoke French all the time. And this professor said, "You are going to be a Spanish professor." And I said, "There's no way I will become a Spanish professor. Uh, I'm a French major." And then lo and behold, my life took a different turn. And I wound up really falling in love with Spanish literature and getting my PhD in Spanish uh, and teaching Spanish literature, early modern Spanish literature, the 16th and 17th century, during my whole career.
That's amazing that a professor told you what you would do later on in life.
Yeah, and he was right. But I would say somebody else at Georgetown was very influential, and that is when I first started writing. So at the university when I was there, and I don't think that in all departments it's the same still, but creative writing was very discouraged. If you were in uh, an if you were not in a creative writing department. So I was a Spanish professor, and I was supposed to write articles about early modern Spanish figures. Um, and I was not encouraged to write. On the contrary, my department chair said, when you come up for promotion, don't mention that you write novels. And even when I won prizes and things, he said, don't ever mention it. When you do your CV, don't mention your novels, don't mention your textbooks, don't mention your journalism, don't mention any of those things, only mention your scholarly articles. And at one point, I was at a religious retreat, and I mentioned to one of the Jesuit priests that I was writing a novel about Frida Kahlo. But it's taking me a long time because I was very discouraged from doing it by my department chair, and he was giving me lots of other things to do. And I said, I don't know if I should, he said, look, he said, you're old enough to do whatever the hell you want. That's what he said. That's a quote. And he said, just do it. And I said, well, I don't know. I said, it's a novel about a naughty lady. And he said, if there were no naughty ladies, there would be no really good novels. He said, just do it. And so that was a person who maybe you wouldn't expect that kind of advice from, but he was very influential. And I felt at that point I felt liberated. I felt like I could just go ahead and do it, uh, and I did do it. So yeah, that what happened was I was working on the novel, and I went to uh, uh, a writers conference, and there was an agent there, and he said he was very interested in the book, and he wanted me to. I had showed him a chapter, and he wanted to see the rest of it. So then I thought, oh, I really have to get busy and write this book, right? I have to finish it. So I finished it, and I sent it to him. And he said, no, he said, I'm not going to take this book. He said, because we already have a Hispanic last name on our list. I said, okay, well, what can I say? He said, we already have a Hispanic. We don't need another one. I said, okay, is that that's the criterion? Okay. So but I wasn't upset. I wasn't as upset as I could have been because I thought, okay, now the book is done. Now I have done it, and now I just have to send it to agents and get an agent. And I mean, at least I have written the book. So I did. I sent it to agents, and it was taken by an agent, and it was published soon after.
Okay, okay. Now, um, going back in the past, what got you started in writing in general? What, I mean, beyond not being athletic, as you said, or not being picked to be athletic, you got into writing. What was your motivation as a youngster to get into writing?
Um, well, I started out writing for the school newspaper, and won a journalism prize. And so, I mean, that gave me confidence. And when I went to UCLA, I started writing for the Daily Bruin, which was the school newspaper. And so I've always written lots of different kinds of things. I've written for newspapers, I've written for magazines. Um, my first real job was for a publisher writing textbooks, and I wrote Spanish language textbooks, and every chapter ended with a little story, and I wrote the short stories, most of them, and they had dialogues, and I wrote all these things. So I always wrote, and then I started my PhD, and I've just always written short stories and then novels, and I continue to write journalism. I do interviews with people and book reviews and all kinds of things. I'm always writing something.
Okay, okay. Now, getting to this book here, about Dolores Del Rio. What made you want to write about her?
Well, I became interested in Dolores del Rio. Her friends called her Lola, so I'll call her Lola. I've been with her such a long time. I think I I can call her Lola. Um, when I was actually working on my book on Frida, and Dolores del Rio and Frida Kahlo were friends. And so when I did the book on Frida, Lola was a character. She was a cameo. She had a small part, but I thought it was very interesting, the contrast between these two women. Frida was very brazen. She was very brash. She was very vulgar. She liked to use bad language. She liked to shock people. She liked to use clothing that was different and attracted attention. Uh, of course, one of the reasons she always wore her long Mexican Tijuana dresses was because of her injury when she had polio as a child, and then she was in an accident as a adolescent, and she walked with a limp. And so one of the reasons that she wore the long dresses is that she had to wear an orthopedic shoe. But that's not the only reason. She liked to dress differently. She liked to be different. She liked to wear a lot of jewelry. Okay, so. Um, and she liked to shock. She said did a lot of things for shock value. Dolores del Rio was just the opposite. She was the epitome of elegance. She was she was not vulgar. She did not use vulgar language. Uh, she didn't get drunk. She didn't do drugs. She didn't. Uh, she was known for her elegance. In addition to being an immediate hit in Hollywood, she became a fashion icon. So she was in all the fashion magazines. She was voted by a panel of so-called experts the most beautiful woman in the world, which I always thought was funny. Not the most beautiful woman in Hollywood or the most beautiful woman in California, but the most beautiful woman in the whole entire world. And by a panel of course, all male experts, doctors, lawyers, directors, producers, all kinds of men. And she was beautiful. If I could be permitted to show a couple of pictures,
Yes.
can you see?
Yes. Oh, wow.
Yeah, right. Here's another one.
Oh, whoa. Ooh.
And here's one more. So she is the most beautiful woman in the world. She was considered the most beautiful woman in the world. Um, but so she was elegant, uh, but she was also a very tough, resilient woman. I in many ways, Frida was needy. She was a woman who needed constant attention. Um, Lola was a very tough woman. She was very resilient. She went through uh, a lot of problems, she had a lot of obstacles um, during her lifetime, but she always picked herself up. They called her mother La Gata, the cat, because she always landed on all fours. And Lola was the same way. She always managed to pick herself up, twist around in the air, land on her feet, and move ahead. And so I thought, this woman really, and she also did some pretty wonderful things during her lifetime. I thought this woman really merits her own novel. So that's why I started writing this novel.
Okay. So when you start writing about a real life person, you're writing about their character. How do you decide what part of their history ends and your imagination kind of begins? Like, how do you differentiate in your head? Like, hey, I'm going to take this excerpt and then I'm going to add in my razzle dazzle.
That's a wonderful question, and I'm sorry more people don't ask that because that's really the key to writing what they call biofiction. So biofiction, fiction about a real person, um, is uh, it's dicey. It's very precarious. It's kind of dangerous because you're trying to get into somebody else's head, right? And so uh, when I write biofiction, first of all, I do a lot of research. I read a lot of biographies. In this case, I read a lot of movie reviews. I watched her films. I did a lot of reading. And also a lot of historical reading about the beginnings of the movie industry and uh, the silent films and things like that. So, in terms of what I tell you in the novel about her life, I think that that is accurate. But but it's a novel. It's not a biography. So where does the fiction come in? That's the question. And of course, the fiction comes in the emotions, in the dialogue, uh, in what you think happened. In one of the things I love about fiction is and biofiction especially is that it gives you time, it gives you space to conjecture. What was really going on in her head? What was she thinking? What was she what went on when she broke up with Jaime del Rio? What was she really thinking, or what did she feel? And when she went back to Mexico, and she was so mistreated by Emilio Fernandez, the director. How did she really feel about that? So, okay, so how do you deal with things like that? When you write biofiction, I think it's very important for the reader to know that this is fiction, that you are conjecturing. I don't think it is right. And not all authors agree with me, but I don't think it's right for the author to try to play God and assume that she knows what another person is thinking or feeling. So when I write biofiction, I try to always invent a device that makes it clear that what I'm recounting is how somebody else sees it, but may not be the subject's actual feelings. And how I did it this time was by inventing a character, Mara, who is the narrator. And Mara is Lola's hairdresser, but also her very close friend. Both of them were born in Durango. Both of them, during the revolution, wind up in Mexico City, and then they both wind up in Hollywood. Mara is the she's doesn't know who her mother is. She's raised by an aunt who was a maid. Um, but Mara is smart. She becomes a hairdresser, and she becomes a licensed hairdresser. And before the 20s, you didn't need a license to practice to be a beautician, what they called a beautician in those days. Uh, but then you did, and she went and she got her license, and she learned to speak English, and she was uh, ambitious, and she graduated high school. So anyhow, so Mara and Lola meet up together in Hollywood, and Mara is the one who tells the story. But Mara is what we call an unreliable narrator. Mara tells the story, but she says things like, "This is what happened," or at least this is the way I remember it, and or this is what she said, or this is what I think she said. Or, she made me so mad when she said that because she meant, well, I mean, that's what I think she meant. So, so it's always filtered through Mara, and that adds an area of or a layer of subjectivity between me, the real narrator, let's say, and the subject, Lola, because I'm always reminding the reader that the story is filtered through Mara's mind. And so certain things are absolutely true. I mean, when she came to she had a miscarriage, and then she then she took up creative dancing, and then she went to Hollywood, and then all of these things are absolutely verifiably true. Um, uh, Her marriages, her affairs, all of that has been verified. But of course, what she was thinking and feeling is filtered through Mara's memory, and so I think that's a more honest way of working with biofiction.
And I can agree with that. Kind of like taking a recollection and going from there, and then putting your spin on the recollection, but keeping it clear. And I'll thank you for explaining that, because that right there differentiates a fan fiction. Because the way that you put it right there, I thank you so much for doing that, because a listener or someone watching the video now can differentiate a fan fiction to what you're talking about from that.
Right. This is not hagiography. This is not somebody who worships Dolores del Rio. This is a character, a woman who who looks at Dolores del Rio, who's her friend, and loves her, and sees her almost as a sister, and but is not impressed with. First of all, is not impressed with the whole movie scene. Um, she's not impressed. I mean, she's just not impressed with all of the glitz and glamour of Hollywood. Mara, another really important role that Mara has in this book is giving context to the story. Because if you look at just Dolores del Rio's life, I mean, this is a woman who was extremely wealthy, became a very high paid movie star. She came from a wealthy family. Her father was a banker. They lost a lot during the Mexican Revolution, but her father was a banker. He was shrewd. He knew how to invest money. He invested money in Texas. Um, Mara, so Dolores del Rio didn't go through a lot of the things that you and I go through, that lots of people go through, right? She had a miscarriage when she was very young and couldn't have children after that. That was a real tragedy for a Mexican woman in the 20s, or I think any woman at any time who wants children. Not being able to have children is a tragedy. For her, it was a real tragedy. Um, But because she didn't have children, because a lot of the time she wasn't married, because she was independently wealthy, a lot of things didn't affect her. Whereas Mara gets married, she has four little girls, the depression starts. The depression doesn't affect Dolores del Rio at all. But Mara's husband loses his job. Mara has to go back to work at the beauty shop. I mean, there's the whole problem of, childcare, who's going to take care of the kids, then her husband's mother takes care of the children, and I mean, there's all of this. And then this is something that Lola doesn't have to worry about, but 90% of the people in the United States had to worry about, right? There was a depression on. People couldn't find jobs. There were bread lines. People were starving. This is something that if I just told the story of Dolores del Rio, that I could skip over. But if I'm going to give her any context, I need to be able to talk about that. And Mara is the one who brings that, to the forefront. Then there's the question of the polio epidemic. So we just went through the COVID epidemic, but the polio epidemic was much, much worse. And the pictures and magazines of kids in iron lungs, and people were afraid to go out. They were afraid to let their children go out. They were afraid to. I mean, children were dying, and it was, I mean, it was terrible. So if you've got four little girls, um, at one point, Gabriel, um, Mara's husband says, don't take the children, don't take the children to the park, don't take them to the public pool, don't take them out, don't let them talk to anybody, because they're so afraid that these children will get sick. That's something Lola doesn't have to worry about, but that's something that they have to worry about. And he says, don't even let them pet dogs because you don't know who petted that dog before. Don't let them do anything. And so, I remember when they had pictures of children in iron lungs. That's something that was a reality. And then World War II starts, uh, and what happens? Lola isn't affected by World War II, uh, other than the fact that in the 30s, the the movie industry becomes very xenophobic. They don't want to hire foreign actors, so she is labeled box office poison. Uh, she goes back to Mexico, but Mara's husband goes into the army, and then Mara is left raising four little girls on her own. So she's a single mother. So I mean, that's something that I think lots and lots of readers can identify with. So this is what Mara's function is. She creates context and she creates distance.
Okay, and I like that the realism there that you get from Mata, and you kind of get the fairy tale from Dolores. Now, I do want to go back to aspect of Hollywood. Hollywood in the 1920s and 30s for a Latina actress. What
Mhm.
was that? What was that landscape like? What were the barriers that they had to face just in between, like just being involved in Hollywood then? Because I would say then it would be a Caucasian dominated arena, maybe more male correct than female.
Okay. Well, so something strange happened in the 20s, and that is you're absolutely right, that until then, all the actors were light-skinned. So the women who were popular were Lillian Gish and Gloria Swanson and Clara Bow. These were all Mary Pickford. The blonde curls or little red curls and white skins. And even though movies were in black and white, they were all very fair skinned. And then the men, Joel McCrea and Douglas Fairbanks, they were all. Yes, you're absolutely right. But in 1921, Rudolph Valentino came to Hollywood and he made a movie called The Shake. And he became the first Latin lover. He was dark, he was Italian. He was dark and he was a sensation. Everybody was in love with Rudolph Valentino. Men wanted to be like him. They started parting their hair, wearing pomade, and the women swooned, and everybody was in love with Rudolph Valentino. And the taste changed, and Hollywood wanted Latin lovers. Rudolph Valentino made piles of money for Paramount Pictures. The Shake was a huge, huge success. And so all the movie studios were looking for their Latin lover. Um, Lola's cousin, Ramon Novarro, was the next Latin lover. He starred in Ben-Hur, wearing very, very skimpy clothing, the 1920s Ben-Hur. Uh, and he was very, very popular. And Lola was perfect for the female Latin lover. So at that point, uh, it was the ideal time for a Latina to come to Hollywood. She was exactly what they were looking for. Um, she was beautiful. She was uh, brunette and exotic looking. But there was an issue, and that is that in every state of the United States, there were laws against mixed marriage, and you could not show people of two different races on the stage in a on the screen in a romantic relationship. So the studios were afraid that because she was Mexican, um, the laws actually applied mainly to black and white marriage.
Hmm.
And then a book came out called The Great Yellow Menace uh, about the Chinese menace because people became afraid that we were going to be invaded by Chinese. And um, so then the law became very strict in terms of mixed marriages between um, what they call the yellow menace and whites. Mexicans were in a kind of a different situation after Roosevelt became president because he was pushing good relations, the good neighbor policy, and good relations with Latin America, and so uh, rules against Mexicans weren't as strict. But even so, when she started acting in the 20s, um, the studios were afraid that she was too dark uh, to to star, with people like Joel McCrea. So they marketed her, and don't forget that actresses are products
Yes.
and actors are products. They marketed her as a Spanish aristocrat. Dolores del Rio was not Spanish, and she was not an aristocrat, but that was what sold, right? So if she was Spanish, she was white, and if she was white, then she could play with, again, opposite Jean Raymond or Douglas Fairbanks or any of those actors. And so that's how she was marketed. And I think she was not maybe so happy about it, but if you wanted to make it in Hollywood, that's what you had to do. Um, so that's how she was marketed during her whole time in Hollywood. Um, but I have to say she wasn't just a pretty face. She took her acting seriously. She she came to the United States. She had to perfect her English. She knew a little bit of English, but she had to learn better English. Movies were silent, so she didn't need to know English to make movies, but she knew that in order to survive, she needed to learn English, and she took it. She was serious. She was a serious actress, and she was a comic actress. So it's hard. Sometimes people can't believe that she was serious. So her movies sometimes are very silly. But she took acting seriously, um, and she took learning English very seriously, and she practiced her pronunciation. Uh, and so she was very very successful. And then what happened in 1927 is that talkies were introduced, and a lot of a lot of actors, even if they were native speakers of English, um, lost their careers because their voices weren't um, appropriate. They didn't, their voices didn't jive with their screen personalities. But Lola met the challenge by, I said she was resilient, met the challenge by always playing foreigners. So she played French women, she played Russian, she played Brazilian, um, and the American audience was not so sophisticated at the time. They didn't distinguish between one accent and another. And so she played all of these different accents, and she made her She made her own accent work for her. And so she continued her career.
Okay, I can see where she was resilient with that. Man, that would be kind of wild for her to play Russian, but I guess
Oh,
it
she
worked.
did. She played it. She did. She
Yes,
did
it
play
worked.
Russian.
Okay, now after you're finished with this book, what does the future hold for you? What's the next thing we can look forward to from you?
Well, I am working on another book. I'm a little bit superstitious about talking about my next novel project. It is about a Mexican woman uh, and also about an actress, but a very different kind of actress.
Okay.
Uh, um, a very brash kind of actress, a comic actress, but one with very, very, very serious emotional problems. Um, Lola was actually a very resilient, well-balanced person, considering all the things that she went through. I mentioned a miscarriage, um, and then she came to the United States, and wound up divorcing her husband, Jaime del Rio.
Mm.
She was married to him. Her parents married her to him when she was 16 years old, and he was reputedly gay, and but he was very wealthy, and they thought he was a good catch. He was much older than she. She was 16. He was in his 30s. Um, he was gay, so that didn't work out. She loved him, but it wasn't a marriage. And so that ended in divorce. And then she married Cedric Gibbons, who was a very famous set designer. He designed the Oscar, the statue, the Oscar.
Oh.
Yeah, and he was very, very successful. Just at the time, as I said, in the 30s, it was hard for foreigners to get acting jobs, and she was not getting good jobs. Her career was kind of uh, fading, and his was very successful. And so I mean, it's all these foreign actors. Uh, Marlene Dietrich gave up her German citizenship uh, because she did not support Hitler. And she took on American citizenship and went to work for the USO. She couldn't get good jobs either. She went to work entertaining American and British soldiers behind enemy lines. She was very brave. Greta Garbo went back to Sweden and became hardly made any more movies after that. Um, and Lola went to Mexico. Um, so yeah, so she was just a very resilient person.
Okay. Now, after you finished writing this book, compared to the Frida book, what was like what was your feeling once you finished this book that was different from when you finished your Frida book?
Um, so Frida Frida was an immediate bestseller. Frida was published in 18 languages. It's still being published. It just came out in Portuguese. It was published in the last translation was into Portuguese, and it came out actually last week in Brazil.
Oh,
But it came out in Germany, it came out in Turkey, it was published in one language after the other. It came out in Spain. It was a bestseller in Latin America. Um, so I mean I have to say that a part of it was because I mean a large part of it was because Frida was such an important character, right? There was a Frida mania uh, phenomenon going on. There were Frida magnets and Frida uh, T-shirts and Frida everything, right? Frida calendars. Um,
Yeah, it's own pop culture.
yeah, she was really, really a pop icon, I think, for a number of reasons. The Hispanic movement, the feminist movement, the gay movement. I mean, everything was the confluence of all these movements really uh, led to her immediate popularity. Whereas Dolores del Rio is uh, not as well known. She's not known by the majority of people. People, when they read the book, often they say to me, "Oh, we didn't know anything about her," before we read your book. So one of the things I wanted to do with this book was uh, bring to people's attention uh, Dolores del Rio as an actress, as a very important actress during the beginnings of Hollywood. Um, People, when they study the history of Hollywood, they remember Marlene Dietrich, and they remember Greta Garbo, and they remember von Sternberg, and a lot of the Germans, Billy Wilder, and these different directors. But they forget that there was a very, very strong Mexican presence in Hollywood, and Ramon Novarro and Lupe Vélez, and of course Dolores del Rio, and so many others were really, really important during the first years. The other thing was, because she started the first daycare center in Mexico. So I said she was more than a pretty face. This is a woman who uh,
Advocacy.
when she really had a clear idea of needing to give back. And when she went back to Mexico, when she was in the United States, she made a lot of movies that were kind of silly, kind of trivial. uh, the American public wanted that. We were going through the Depression, and then the war was looming, Nazis, then the Stalinists, the starvation, the mass starvation, and all of this. People were terrified. They wanted to be entertained. They wanted to be taken away from all of that. But in other countries, in Germany and the Soviet Union and Italy and France and Mexico, there was another movement, a movement to make very serious films about social problems. And so she wanted to, when she went back to Mexico, it enabled her to take part of in that movement. The head of that was Emilio Fernandez, and she was in all of his early movies. But the other thing that she did, if she looked around her and she saw all of these women in the movie industry in that were doing menial jobs like cooks or janitors or seamstresses, and they had no place to leave their children. And she had lost. I mean, she didn't have any children, but she loved children. And she and what these women came mostly from the countryside, and in the countryside they had a safety net. They had aunts and mothers and sisters and cousins, and so there was a whole network to help them. But in the city, they didn't have that. So what did they do? They left their kids. They had to work. If they had husbands, the husbands were busy. They were doing construction jobs or whatever, and they were gone. And so there was what were they going to do with their kids? So they left them in what they called guarderías. Um, it's a word that's still used in Spanish today, but guardar means to keep, and they were basically holding pens for babies. So you might have one person for 40 kids, a person with no training, a person with no knowledge of early childhood education, nothing, just a person who's there giving bottles to babies and letting toddlers play. Nobody, maybe changing diapers. But she said, Lola said, this is a terrible situation, and she and Maria Felix raised the money to start a daycare system in Mexico. It was the first daycare system. It wasn't just one daycare center; it was a whole system for these women in the movie industry and in the theater industry, um, where they could leave their children. And she hired teachers. She studied Maria Montessori. She studied Jean Piaget. She studied early modern childhood education and provided real teachers that provided a nurturing environment for these children so that they could get a good start and their mothers could leave them there and be confident they'd be taken care of.
And I see that's a very great thing that she did, because that infrastructure has probably been passed on to other realms of media and different things like that. And for her to think that much about children and parents when she couldn't be a parent, that says a lot about her character.
She was a very special person. She was a person who really, I mean, when she went back to Mexico, she was one of the reasons that it was important to her to go back to Mexico was that she wanted to make movies that were socially relevant. And so, Mexico had a lot of social problems. Everybody had a lot of social problems. But Mexico had a lot of social problems, and they had a large Indian population that had been badly exploited. The poverty level, the uh, illiteracy, all these things were problems. Violence against women, alcoholism, all of these things were issues. And the films that she made, instead of being trivial little fun movies, they were serious movies that dealt with these problems. And so, and they were beautiful, beautiful movies. Um, Emilio Fernandez, she had an affair with him. He was actually a horrible person. He was uh, misogynist. He was violent. He was brutal. He was an awful person, but a brilliant director. And he worked with Gabriel Figueroa, who was a wonderful cinematographer. These movies are beautiful, um, even if you don't know Spanish or don't speak Spanish or understand Spanish, they're worth looking at just because they're beautiful films. And Maria Candelaria, one of her first movies with Fernandez, won. It was the first time any Latin American movie had ever won the Palme d'Or in France. It wasn't called that then. It was first prize in the Cannes Film
The film
Festival.
festival. Okay.
Yeah, and uh, Figueroa won for cinematography, and Fernandez won for direction. So she didn't win for Best Actress, but the fact that she was in that film and starred in that film, I mean, it really, really boosted her career.
So it's almost like so it would be the equivalency of like maybe watching a Criterion type film,
It um
like cinematography wise, though,
uh if you've seen Orson Welles films,
like
his early
1984.
films, yeah, like yeah. What was the one he made about William Randolph Hearst? Uh, God, the name escapes me. Oh, the fa shoot, the name just escapes me right now. But anyhow, but the playing with the camera, the wide angles and the close-ups and uh, the use of black and white, is quite amazing.
All right, so I'll definitely make sure in the show notes that we point that out to the audience. So, Barbara, I want to thank you for coming on the show, and I want to thank you for enlightening us about a person that we do not know about, or a lot of people may not have known about, in Dolores Del Rio. Said it right that time.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you also for taking the time to put this out here in the world so that people can notice about her. And I hope that people get more entwined. Now, one thing I do need you to do real quick is one thing that's nostalgic to the show is called the shameless plug. Can I get you to plug where people can meet and greet you across the internet?
Sure. Well, here's the book, Miss Del Rio, and it's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and your local bookstore and hopefully your local bookstore. Um, and it's easy, it is easy to find on Amazon. And I have a website. It's www.barbaramujica, one word.com. Um, and Miss Del Rio also has her own website, which is www dot miss dash del dash rio.com. So you can look her up or any of my other books, Frida, Sister Teresa, I Am Venus, Imagining a Rock. There's a whole bunch of them. So feel free. Please do.
All right. So on that note, I am JR and we are signing off.
Thank you.